Hey, welcome back to 7 Minute Stories. I'm here with Ben Mays.
Hello.
How you doing, Ben?
Good.
So tonight we wanted to come in and you're going to tell me a little bit about what's going on. We were going to talk about hearing from God. So first of all, why don't you just tell me a little bit about the story you're talking to me about? Because I think this is a really similar experience for a lot of people. Is I'm at night, I get woken up in the middle of the night, or I'm just doing something throughout the day, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, I should call so and so. I feel like I should pray for so and so.
Yeah.
Nah, I'm crazy,
Yeah.
right? But you had that happen to you recently.
Yeah. It's really easy to talk yourself out of things like that. And I've been trying recently to actually listen, even when I do think it's just myself being weird or something like that. And I've had a couple times where one just the other day where I felt like I was just supposed to text something to someone or call someone, and it turned out to be really impactful for them. And even though I didn't really have anything to do with it, it was really cool to be a part of something like that.
So tell me about, like, how does that moment start? So you're working on something completely unrelated, or were you kind of thinking about them to begin with?
That last time I was just sitting down trying to have some quiet time, but I was really busy and struggling anyway, but it just came into my head. I just had a memory of that person, and it brought up something that I felt like I was supposed to tell them, and then I just couldn't stop thinking about it, so I finally just did it, however weird and awkward. Practiced it out in a note beforehand and typed it. And
That's
sent
really interesting. I haven't done that.
I have done that many times.
That's probably smarter because usually
Yeah,
I'm
'cause
just like, I don't know what to say.
Could accidentally send it before you're done, and it's really awkward.
Well, yeah, I mean, you and I were talking a little bit about this, but it's that moment where, like you said, one part of what you just said in your story is that you're setting aside quiet time to listen, and then like people say like, oh, I heard from God, and we've talked about this in the program before, where it's like people think that that's your coffee table lit on fire and was like
Yes.
Ben Mays, like take off your sandals, like, but what is that actually like?
Yeah, so for me, this is something I struggled with forever because that's kind of what I expected. But it's usually just sounds like my own voice in my head. And I have a constant dialogue running usually, very busy thinker, but usually it ends up being something that I just can't let go of. Sometimes, have a little heart race with it or whatever if it's something that's like important and in the moment that needs to happen. And it's really hard to know if it was until you just do it. So that's been the hardest thing, is to just do it.
Yeah, I've had that happen before where I felt like where God tells you something about somebody that you couldn't possibly know, and I'm like, I'm not going to say that to them. But the only way to test it is to actually go and say, hey, I was wondering about this.
Yeah, and I've actually kind of thought about this earlier and have somewhat of an analogy that a lot of people probably won't get, but you kind of can. It reminds me of mountain biking when you want to get better at like taking jumps, and it's terrifying, and you approach it and bail off to the side every time, and the only way you can actually get better at doing it is just to hit it. If you take it too slow or try to bail out last second, you're a lot more likely to mess up badly.
Oh, yeah. Well, especially that translates into snowboarding and a couple other sports where it's like, for snowboarding, you actually usually have a ramp, and then there's a slope that you actually go down the hill. So you'll see people that snowboard, and there's like a big giant hill, and then there's a little bitty ramp on the top of it. And so what you actually jump off of is that ramp, and the whole incline was actually to catch you on the way down. Like you change the angle of your board and it catches you on the way down. And so, but if there's a gap in between those two things, and so if, like you said, if you kind of, go over it in a wimpy way, or if, you kind of go, like you actually hit that flat part, you don't hit the slope down and it jars you. And so that's a good analogy. So you texted somebody and that was beneficial for them?
Yeah, they said that it was like something they really needed to hear in that moment that they'd been struggling with. And so I only knew because I did it. I could have just thought about it and then maybe felt guilty about it later, but you don't know until you just do it.
So that was kind of an interesting process, because I would say, like, what would you recommend for people? I'm going to say that you should start with like what you did with quiet time. But so if they get a thought that's kind of a stray thought, like what would your advice be to them?
something that's kind of helped me and some other people I know is if it's not like something urgent at all, just write it down. And if it is reoccurring, then you probably want to give it more thought. I've heard I don't prayer journal a lot, but I've heard from a lot of people that things like that are very helpful, and I've done it a little bit like that.
So you write it down. You're kind of asking, Lord, is this you, or did I have some bad pizza? You know,
Yeah.
and then like, do you have like a confirmation feeling like when you you can't let go of it?
Yeah, it's usually just that it won't go away, but you can also go to your pastor, go to someone else and see what they think.
That's a good point, because like a lot of times it's discerning, like, is this biblical?
Mm-hmm.
Is it not biblical?
Yeah, and you can always go to the Word, of course.
So is this like, how often does this occur for you?
Definitely more often than I act on it, but I don't know. I've had a couple of things like that in the last few months, and praying over people here that things like that happen.
Have you ever had that experience? I do, where it's like I hear something and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to tell them that, and then somebody else says it.
Yes.
So
yes, in group prayer settings that happens.
yeah, it's like, then you start to kick yourself, like, I
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
have stepped out in faith on that.
Yeah. At least then you can confirm it for them.
Well, that's good. So for our listeners, have that quiet time. Maybe write it. That was a good tip. Like, maybe write it down, ask somebody else. And then when you're getting geared up, you said that you actually pre-wrote it on a note.
Yeah.
But like, maybe if your text message, you could do a couple drafts of it.
Mm.
And then have you ever had to give that to somebody in person?
Only when like praying for people at the church. I don't think I've done it like at the store, like some public setting like that. Maybe once or twice where I felt like I was supposed to talk to someone or give money to someone, but for some reason it's mostly been like, hey, you need to text this person or call this person randomly. But
Yeah. And does it normally work out pretty okay once you get past the awkward part of it?
yeah, I've never had it backfire, so
That's good. It's encouraging for people, because I think that a lot of times people are like, this
yeah,
is going to,
'cause that's the hardest part, is everything you think could possibly go wrong,
but then it doesn't.
and then it doesn't.
Well, cool, man. Well, thank you for coming in and sharing that. Like I said, I think that's going to be encouraging to people, because I think a lot of people have that experience. A lot of people, you and I have talked about that before. People say, I don't feel like I've heard from God.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I think that you do, but it's embarrassing and it's awkward.
Yeah, it's hard to test it.
Yeah.
And to test it, you have to know his words and then test the words that aren't directly from the Bible that you don't know for sure. You have to test it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you get a word that it's like, you should go slap somebody, be like, oh, no, I read here in the Bible that I'm supposed to turn the other
Yeah.
cheek. But obviously, if it's like, you should go tell somebody, give them a word of encouragement, tell them God hasn't left them.
Yeah, it's usually a pretty safe thing
Yeah.
to go with.
What's the worst that can happen? They're encouraged and have joy.
Mm.
Well, good. I'm glad you're doing that. And like I said, we want to encourage you guys listening at home that if you feel like you get that word, if you feel like you get that thought, that persistent thought, and you want to do that, you can do what my good friend Ben here does and pre-write it out, or you could just do what I do and wing it.
Yeah,
It's probably better if you write it out and process it.
it depends on the situation. If it's like someone that you're behind line in Walmart and it takes too long to write out the draft, that could be a problem.
You're going to have to start carrying Post-its with you at
Carrying
Walmart.
Post-its with you. Yes, very good.
Well, I'm glad you're taking a step out of that, because it is a scary situation. But thanks for coming on and sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll see you guys here next time on 7 Minute Stories.